In this video, we're going to be breaking down one insane theory for every Gravity Falls character. Let's get started with the video. First up, we have Dipper Pines, the reincarnation theory. Dipper Pines, the boy who has lived before. Dipper Pines arrives in Gravity Falls for what he believes is his first summer in the strange Oregon town. He's a 12-year-old boy from Piedmont, California, eager to solve mysteries and uncover the supernatural secrets hidden in the forests around his great-uncle's tourist trap. But according to a haunting theory that has captivated fans since the show's conclusion, this isn't Dipper's first time in Gravity Falls. In fact, Dipper has been to Gravity Falls many times before, across many different lifetimes, always arriving at age 12, always driven by the same insatiable curiosity, always meeting the same tragic end before he can complete whatever cosmic purpose keeps pulling him back to this town. The birthmark that reveals everything. The most obvious piece of evidence for Dipper's reincarnation is literally written on his forehead. The constellation of 5 dots that forms the Big Dipper, the birthmark that gave him his nickname, isn't just a cute coincidence. It's a mark that identifies him across lifetimes, a cosmic signature that proves he's the same soul, returning again and again. Birthmarks in folklore and mythology are often associated with violent deaths and past lives, marks carried forward from one existence to the next as reminders of how the previous life ended. Dipper's birthmark is identical in arrangement to the Big Dipper constellation, which has been used for navigation for thousands of years. The Big Dipper points to Polaris, the North Star, the star that guides travelers home. But for Dipper, this celestial map on his forehead doesn't guide him home. It guides him back to Gravity Falls over and over again like a compass that only points in one direction. He's marked by the stars themselves, branded with a symbol that ensures he'll always find his way back to the place where he's died before and will die again. The theory suggests that every version of Dipper throughout history has had this same birthmark. In the 1800s, there was a 12-year-old boy with 5 dots on his forehead who came to Gravity Falls and discovered something he shouldn't have. In the 1920s, another boy with the same mark arrived and met the same fate. In the 1960s, another, each one believing he was unique, each one drawn to the town's mysteries, each one dying before he could understand the pattern he was caught in. The journal connection that transcends time. Dipper's relationship with Journal 3 takes on profound new meaning when viewed through the lens of reincarnation. He finds the journal almost immediately upon arriving in Gravity Falls, buried in the forest, as if it was waiting specifically for him. The journal fits his hand perfectly. Its mysteries speak to something deep inside him. He understands the author's thought processes instinctively, feels a connection to the person who wrote these entries decades ago. But what if Dipper's connection to the journal isn't just admiration for a kindred spirit? What if he recognizes the handwriting because it was his own in a previous life? The theory proposes that Dipper himself was one of the journal's authors in a past incarnation. Not the Dipper we know, but a previous version of the same soul. A boy with the same birthmark who came to Gravity Falls in an earlier era and documented his discoveries before his life was cut short. This explains why Dipper treats the journal with such reverence, why he guards it so carefully, why losing it causes him such distress. On a subconscious level, he knows this book is his legacy from himself, a message sent forward across time by a previous iteration of his own soul. Every time he reads an entry, he's reading his own thoughts from a life he can't consciously remember. Every mystery he solves, using the journal's information, he's following a trail he laid for himself decades or centuries ago. The journal entries themselves might contain hidden messages meant specifically for future versions of Dipper, warnings about mistakes past Dippers have made, clues about how to break the cycle of death and return, information about whatever enemy or force keeps killing him before he can complete his purpose in Gravity Falls. The current Dipper reads these entries and thinks he's learning from a stranger, never realizing he's learning from himself, that the man he admires most, the author whose intellect he respects above all others, is literally him from another time. Why Dipper dies young in every life. The theory proposes that Dipper never makes it past age 12 or 13 in any of his incarnations. Something always happens to end his life just when he's on the verge of a major discovery, just when he's about to understand the true nature of Gravity Falls and whatever cosmic force controls it. This pattern of death at the cusp of understanding suggests that someone or something doesn't want Dipper to succeed, that there's an entity actively preventing him from learning the truth. Each death is different. In one lifetime, perhaps Dipper was killed by a monster from the forest, torn apart by something he encountered while investigating a mystery alone. In another, he might have drowned in the bottomless pit, falling into darkness with no one to hear his screams. In yet another life, he could have been murdered by someone who didn't want their secrets exposed, someone who saw this curious 12-year-old boy getting too close to dangerous knowledge. But despite the varied causes of death, the result is always the same. Dipper dies, his soul is sent back, and he's reborn with no memory of what came before. The only thing that carries forward is the birthmark, the cosmic branding that ensures he'll be drawn back to Gravity Falls when he reaches age 12 again. It's a curse disguised as destiny, an eternal loop where Dipper is given just enough time to fall in love with mystery solving, just enough time to develop his skills and build confidence, and then he's killed before he can use those skills to break free. The current Dipper we watch in the show is walking the same path as all his predecessors. He's making the same mistakes, asking the same questions, heading toward the same tragic end. Unless something changes, unless this version of Dipper can somehow break the pattern, he'll die just like all the others. And a new Dipper will be born 12 years later, with no memory of anything that came before. Mabel's role across lifetimes. In this theory, Mabel isn't Dipper's twin by coincidence. She's his constant companion across multiple lifetimes, reincarnated alongside him to play the same role in every iteration. While Dipper is cursed to die young, Mabel is cursed to watch him die, to lose her twin brother over and over again, to carry the grief of his death into her next life, even though she can't consciously remember what happened. This explains the intensity of Mabel's attachment to Dipper, her overwhelming need to keep him safe, her fear of growing up and growing apart, her desperate desire to preserve their relationship exactly as it is, all stem from subconscious memories of losing him before. She doesn't remember the past lives, but her soul remembers the pain. Deep in her subconscious, Mabel knows that letting Dipper out of her sight, allowing him to investigate alone, giving him the freedom to pursue mysteries without her protection, ends in his death. Mabel's cheerful personality, her determined optimism, her refusal to engage with dark or scary possibilities might all be defense mechanisms developed across lifetimes of trauma. She stays positive because negativity leads to thinking about losing Dipper And thinking about losing Dipper triggers subconscious memories of past losses that her mind can't fully access, but her soul can't forget. She creates her own reality of glitter and rainbows and boy bands, because the alternative reality, the one where her brother dies, is too painful to contemplate. In previous lifetimes, Mabel might have been different. Perhaps in the 1800s version, she was more serious, more cautious, more willing to acknowledge danger. But that version of Mabel watched her brother die, and when she reincarnated, her soul adjusted, creating new personality traits designed to protect Dipper through cheerfulness and distraction, rather than through warning and restriction. Each lifetime, Mabel's personality shifts slightly, her soul trying different approaches to save her twin, never succeeding, always ending up in the same place. The tragic irony is that Mabel's protection might actually contribute to Dipper's deaths. By trying to keep him safe, by distracting him from dangers, by interrupting his investigations with social activities and relationship drama, she might be preventing him from gaining the knowledge he needs to survive. If Dipper was allowed to focus entirely on solving Gravity Falls mysteries, if he had the time and freedom to follow every lead without interruption, he might finally uncover the truth and break the cycle. But Mabel's well-intentioned interference, born from subconscious trauma, keeps him from reaching that understanding. Stanford Pines knows the truth. The theory suggests that Stanford Pines, the author of the journals, knows about Dipper's reincarnation cycle. Ford has spent decades researching Gravity Falls anomalies. And somewhere during his studies, he discovered records of previous Dippers, old photographs showing 12-year-old boys with distinctive birthmarks on their foreheads, historical records mentioning curious children who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, evidence spanning centuries that the same soul keeps returning to Gravity Falls and keeps dying young. This knowledge is why Ford feels such an immediate connection to Dipper when they finally meet. It's not just that they share similar personalities and interests. Ford recognizes Dipper as someone he's known before in previous iterations, someone he's failed to save multiple times across his long life. Ford might have been in Gravity Falls during previous Dipper incarnations, might have befriended past versions of this boy, watched them die, and carried the guilt forward. Ford's decision to take Dipper as an apprentice takes on darker significance through this lens. He's not just mentoring a promising young student, he's desperately trying to give this version of Dipper the knowledge and training that past Dippers lacked, trying to break the cycle by preparing Dipper for whatever kills him. When Ford offers Dipper the chance to stay in Gravity Falls, to give up his normal life and dedicate himself to studying anomalies, he's offering Dipper the opportunity to transcend the pattern, to become someone different from the 12-year-old boys who came before and died. But Ford also understands the danger. If he tells Dipper the truth, if he explains the reincarnation cycle, the shock might trigger something worse, or the cosmic force that keeps killing Dipper might accelerate its plans, eliminating Dipper before Ford can properly prepare him. So Ford has to walk a careful line, providing guidance and protection without revealing the full horror of what he knows, hoping that this time, finally, Dipper will survive long enough to understand and break free. Ford's journals contain more than just documentation of anomalies. Hidden within their pages are warnings and clues meant specifically for Dipper, information that only makes sense if you understand the reincarnation cycle. Ford has been leaving breadcrumbs across decades, creating a trail that leads to the truth, hoping that eventually a version of Dipper will follow it all the way to the end and discover what needs to be discovered to break the curse, the pine tree symbol, and eternal return. Dipper's symbol in the Zodiac wheel is the pine tree, and this symbol carries profound meaning in the context of reincarnation. Pine trees are evergreens, trees that never lose their needles, that remain alive and green throughout winter, while other trees appear to die. They're symbols of eternal life, of continuity, of things that persist, unchanged, across seasons and years. The pine tree as Dipper's symbol suggests eternal return, the philosophical concept that existence recurs in an infinite cycle. Dipper is the pine tree because he never truly dies. He persists across time, always green, always young, always 12 years old and full of curiosity. While everyone around him ages and changes and eventually dies permanently, Dipper remains constant, frozen at the same age, the same personality, the same desperate need to understand mysteries. But there's tragedy in being an evergreen. Pine trees don't experience the full cycle of seasons. They don't get to bloom in spring or show brilliant colors in fall. They're locked into one state, unchanging, unable to experience the full range of existence. Dipper, similarly, never gets to grow up. He never experiences being 13, being a teenager, being an adult. He's trapped at 12 years old forever, his development arrested at the moment just before adolescence, never allowed to become who he could be if given the chance to live a full life. The pine tree also connects to the setting itself. Gravity Falls is surrounded by endless forests of pine trees, ancient woods that have stood for centuries or longer. These trees have witnessed every iteration of Dipper, every version of this boy, wandering through the forest with a journal in hand, seeking answers he'll never live long enough to find. The trees are silent witnesses to the cycle, unchanging observers who watch the same tragedy play out across generations. In some mystical traditions, pine trees are associated with immortality and resurrection, but also with death and mourning. Pine branches were placed on graves in ancient Rome. Pine cones symbolize the pineal gland, the third eye associated with spiritual enlightenment and hidden knowledge. Dipper's symbol encompasses all these meanings simultaneously, representing both his eternal return and his repeated death, his quest for knowledge and his inability to achieve ultimate understanding, his immortality and his recurring mortality. Bill Cipher's special interest in Dipper. Bill Cipher's obsession with Dipper throughout the series takes on sinister new dimensions if Dipper is a reincarnated soul. Bill exists outside normal time, able to perceive past, present, and future simultaneously. He would absolutely know about Dipper's reincarnation cycle, would have encountered previous versions of Dipper across centuries, and would understand that this boy represents something unique and potentially threatening. Bill's attempts to possess Dipper, to make deals with him, to corrupt him, might all be efforts to either break the cycle or control it. If Dipper is reincarnating for a purpose, if there's some cosmic destiny that keeps bringing him back, Bill might see this as a threat to his own plans for Gravity Falls and the universe beyond. By possessing Dipper, by turning him evil, by breaking his will and destroying his curious nature, Bill could prevent whatever Dipper is meant to accomplish. Alternatively, Bill might be the force causing Dipper's deaths. Perhaps Bill has been killing Dippers across time, eliminating each one just before they discover something Bill desperately wants to keep hidden. Bill exists in the mindscape and the nightmare realm, spaces between realities where souls pass when they die and before they're reborn. He might have the ability to intercept Dipper's soul during the transition to ensure that each new Dipper is born with no memory of previous lives, keeping the cycle going while preventing Dipper from ever accumulating enough knowledge to threaten him. Bill's comment to Dipper, "I've got some children I need to make into corpses," takes on darker meaning if Bill has been killing child versions of Dipper across history. This isn't just a threat against the current Dipper and Mabel. It's a statement of past actions, a reference to all the times Bill has ended a Dipper's life before. Bill is claiming responsibility, admitting that he's murdered children before and will do it again, and Dipper doesn't even realize that he's likely one of Bill's previous victims in past lives. The show's ending and the cycle continuing. Gravity Falls ends with Dipper and Mabel leaving town, heading back to California to start 8th grade. Dipper survives the summer, making it further than perhaps previous incarnations have. But the theory suggests that surviving the summer isn't the same as breaking the cycle. Dipper leaves Gravity Falls alive, but the cosmic forces that control his reincarnation aren't finished with him. Dipper's destiny is tied to Gravity Falls specifically. Leaving the town might grant him temporary reprieve, might allow him to live a few more years, but eventually he'll be drawn back. The town calls to him, pulls at something in his soul, creates circumstances that will bring him back to Oregon. And when he returns, whether in a year or 5 years or a decade, the pattern will reassert itself. He'll die in Gravity Falls, just like all the previous Dippers, and the cycle will begin again. Or perhaps Dipper's survival of the summer represents something different. Maybe by defeating Bill's Cipher, by surviving Weirdmageddon, by making it to the end of summer alive. This version of Dipper has finally broken the pattern. He's accomplished something no previous Dipper managed, proved himself capable of surviving threats that killed his predecessors. If this is true, the cycle might finally be broken and Dipper might be free to live a full life, to grow old, to die of natural causes at the end of a long existence rather than at age 12 in the forests of Oregon. But the show's ambiguous ending leaves this question unresolved. We see Dipper and Mabel leave, but we don't see their future. We don't know if Dipper will live to be 13, to be 20, to be 80. The theory suggests that the cycle continues, that somewhere in the future, another 12-year-old boy will be born with a distinctive birthmark on his forehead, and that boy will feel an inexplicable pull toward a strange town in Oregon, a town he's never visited before, but somehow feels like home. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Mabel Pines, the reality creator theory. Mabel Pines, the girl who makes worlds. Mabel Pines is viewed by most as the fun-loving, optimistic twin sister of Dipper, a 12-year-old girl whose main concerns are boys, crafts, and her pet pig. She's energetic, creative, and sometimes frustratingly distracted from the serious mysteries her brother wants to solve. But according to a theory that re-examines every major event of the series, Mabel isn't just a cheerful girl who happens to live in a weird town. Mabel is the source of Gravity Falls' weirdness itself. She's unconsciously creating the anomalies, the monsters, and the reality-bending events through a power she doesn't understand and can't control. The strange things that happen in Gravity Falls aren't happening to Mabel, they're happening because of her. The evidence hiding in plain sight. The show provides numerous hints that Mabel possesses reality-altering abilities, During Weirdmageddon, when Bill Cipher traps Mabel in a prison of her own creation, she's able to construct an entire alternate reality called Mabeland. This isn't just a simple illusion or a small bubble of changed perception. Mabeland is a complete, functioning reality with physical laws, persistent geography, and inhabitants that behave according to Mabel's desires. The prison works because Mabel has the power to make it real. Bill Cipher specifically targets Mabel for imprisonment, rather than simply killing her or turning her to stone, like he does with so many others. Bill, who exists outside of normal time and space, who can see the true nature of beings, recognizes that Mabel is dangerous to him in ways that other humans aren't. She has the power to alter reality, and if she learned to control that power, if she understood what she could do, she could potentially undo everything Bill accomplishes during Weirdmageddon. So Bill imprisons her in the one type of prison that absolutely cannot fail, a prison that Mabel herself creates and maintains. As long as Mabel wants to stay in Mabeland, as long as she prefers her perfect fantasy to dealing with the complicated real world, she'll keep the prison functioning. Bill doesn't need to maintain it or power it or guard it. Mabel guards herself, using her own reality-altering abilities to create walls that she won't try to escape from. The fact that Mabel can create Mabeland at all, even with Bill's help initiating the process, proves she has the fundamental ability to reshape reality. Bill provides the spark, but Mabel provides the fuel, the creative force that actually constructs and maintains the bubble universe. A normal human couldn't do this. A normal person trapped by Bill would create at most a small illusion, a brief fantasy before their mind gave out. But Mabel creates something that could theoretically last forever, something complete and consistent enough to fool even someone as smart as Dipper for a significant period. How Mabel's imagination becomes real. The theory proposes that Mabel's strong imagination and creative nature aren't just personality traits. They're symptoms of her reality-altering power, manifesting since childhood. When most children imagine things, those things remain imaginary. When Mabel imagines things with sufficient intensity, they begin to actually exist. This explains numerous odd occurrences throughout the series that seem connected to Mabel specifically. Her sweaters, which she knits herself, often seem to have impossible properties. They're completed far too quickly for normal knitting. They feature elaborate designs that would take expert craftspeople weeks to create. They never seem to get dirty or damaged, despite Mabel wearing them during dangerous adventures. These aren't normal sweaters. They're sweaters that Mabel imagines into existence, willing them to be exactly what she wants them to be, and reality complies. Waddles, the pig, demonstrates similar impossible qualities. Waddles is far more intelligent than normal pigs, understanding human speech and responding appropriately to complex situations. He never causes the problems that a real pig living in a house would cause. He's perfectly trained, despite Mabel never being shown training him. He survives adventures that should kill or injure him, like the various monster attacks and reality warping events. Waddles is Mabel's perfect fantasy of what a pet pig should be, and he becomes that fantasy through her unconscious reality manipulation. Mabel's various crushes and romantic pursuits often result in situations that seem too coincidental to be natural. Boys appear in her life exactly when she's ready for a new crush. The elaborate sequences involving her romantic interests play out like scenes from movies or TV shows, rather than realistic human interactions. This is because Mabel, on some level, is scripting reality to match her romantic fantasies. The universe bends to give her the experience she wants, even if that experience doesn't make logical sense. The gnomes in the first episode demonstrate early evidence of Mabel's power. She encounters the gnomes shortly after arriving in Gravity Falls, and they're desperately seeking a queen to rule them. They choose Mabel specifically, recognizing something special about her. The theory suggests that the gnomes, being magical creatures, can sense Mabel's reality-altering nature. They don't want her to be their queen because she's pretty or nice. They want her because having a reality warper as their queen would give their entire species unprecedented power. Gravity Falls exists because of Mabel. The most radical aspect of this theory is the suggestion that Gravity Falls itself, the entire town with all its anomalies and supernatural elements, exists because of Mabel. Before Mabel was born, Gravity Falls was a normal town. The strangeness began appearing around the time of Mabel's birth, growing stronger as she aged, intensifying as her imagination developed and her creative powers increased. Stanford Pines arrived in Gravity Falls decades before Mabel was born, and his research documented anomalies that existed long before her. But the theory explains this through temporal mechanics. Mabel's power doesn't just affect the present, it retroactively affects the past, creating a consistent history for the anomalies she unconsciously wills into existence. When Mabel imagines that Gravity Falls has always been weird, reality adjusts to make that true, creating false memories and false evidence of anomalies existing throughout history. This explains why Stanford's research seems to predict events that happen during Mabel's summer in Gravity Falls. Ford isn't predicting the future. He's documenting a past that Mabel is retroactively creating. His journals contain information about monsters and phenomena that will encounter Mabel because Mabel's power reaches backward through time to ensure those monsters and phenomena existed when Ford was researching. The causation runs in the opposite direction from what it appears. Ford's journals don't warn Dipper about things that exist independently. They describe things that exist because Mabel needs them to exist for her story. The town's name itself, Gravity Falls, might reference the gravitational pull of Mabel's power, the way reality bends and falls toward her desires. The fact that gravity behaves strangely in the town, with objects floating or falling in impossible ways, with time and space warping around certain locations, all stems from Mabel's unconscious manipulation of fundamental forces. Gravity falls according to Mabel's imagination rather than according to physical laws. Why Mabel doesn't know about her power? Mabel remains completely unaware of her reality-altering abilities because knowledge would fundamentally change how the power works. As long as Mabel believes she's living in a weird town where strange things happen, her power can create those strange things naturally. But if she understood that she was causing the weirdness, that every anomaly stems from her imagination, the power would become conscious rather than unconscious. And conscious reality manipulation works differently than unconscious reality creation. Unconscious creation is effortless and complete. Mabel imagines her perfect summer, and that perfect summer becomes real without her needing to think about the details. The town, the people, the adventures all flow naturally because she's not trying to control them. She's just living her life. And reality arranges itself to match her expectations and desires. Conscious creation would require effort, decision-making, and awareness of consequences. If Mabel knew she was creating reality, she would have to actively decide what to create. She would worry about making mistakes, about creating something dangerous, about the ethical implications of manipulating people's lives. The paralysis of conscious choice would prevent her from using her power as effectively as unconscious creation allows. This is why characters who seem to know the truth, like perhaps Stanford Pines or even Stan, never tell Mabel directly. They recognize that explaining her power to her would break the mechanism that makes it work. As long as Mabel remains innocent, as long as she just lives her life without understanding her role in creating it, her power can function at full strength. The moment she becomes aware, the moment she realizes what she can do, everything changes in ways that might not be beneficial. Additionally, Mabel's personality protects her from discovering the truth. She's not interested in deep analysis or existential questions. She doesn't spend time wondering why things happen or how reality works. She accepts what she experiences at face value and moves on to the next fun activity. This incurious nature, which often frustrates Dipper, is actually a defense mechanism. As long as Mabel doesn't ask the big questions, she won't discover the big answers, and her power can continue operating safely in the background. Dipper's role as anchor to reality. Dipper serves a crucial function in this theory. He's Mabel's anchor to reality, the person whose presence prevents her power from completely rewriting existence into pure fantasy. Dipper's skepticism, his need for rational explanations, his dedication to understanding how things actually work, all create a counterbalance to Mabel's creative chaos. When Dipper investigates mysteries and documents findings in his journal, he's creating structure and rules for Gravity Falls' weirdness. He's defining what the monsters can and can't do, how the anomalies function, what patterns exist in the supernatural elements. This investigation forces Mabel's unconscious power to operate within consistent parameters. The anomalies can't be random or completely chaotic because Dipper is observing them, recording them, creating a framework of understanding that reality must conform to. This is why Dipper and Mabel work so well as a team despite their different approaches. Mabel creates, Dipper defines. Mabel imagines possibilities, Dipper determines probabilities. Mabel opens doors to new experiences. Dipper ensures those experiences follow rules that make survival possible. Without Dipper, Mabel's power would likely spiral out of control, creating increasingly chaotic and dangerous situations because there would be no rational mind imposing order on the creative chaos. The show repeatedly emphasizes that Dipper and Mabel need each other, that they're stronger together than apart. In the context of this theory, this need is literal and metaphysical. Mabel needs Dipper's grounding influence to prevent her power from consuming reality. Dipper needs Mabel's creative power to make the adventures and mysteries he loves possible. They're two halves of a reality-creating engine, neither functional without the other. This explains why Bill's Cipher works so hard to drive a wedge between them. If Bill can separate Dipper and Mabel, if he can make them doubt each other or grow apart, Mabel's power becomes unstable. Either she loses her anchor and reality spirals into chaos, or she becomes so afraid of using her power that she shuts down completely, making Gravity Falls vulnerable to Bill's manipulations. Bill recognizes that the twins' bond is literally holding reality together, and breaking that bond is essential to his plans. The rift and Mabel's emotional state. The dimensional rift that becomes central to the show's final arc is directly connected to Mabel's emotional state in this theory. The rift is described as damage to the barrier between dimensions, a crack in reality caused by Ford's experiments. But the theory proposes that Ford's experiments could only create the rift because Mabel's emotional turmoil at that point in the summer had weakened reality's structure. As the summer progresses, Mabel becomes increasingly anxious about it ending, about leaving Gravity Falls and returning to normal life, about growing up and growing apart from Dipper. This anxiety represents a conflict between different versions of reality. There's the reality where summer ends naturally, where the twins go home and start high school and gradually become different people. And there's Mabel's desired reality where summer lasts forever, where nothing ever has to change, where she and Dipper can stay 12 years old and best friends indefinitely. The dimensional rift is the physical manifestation of this conflict. It's reality literally tearing itself apart because Mabel's power is trying to maintain two incompatible versions of existence simultaneously. The rift grows larger and more unstable as Mabel's anxiety intensifies, as her desire to stop time and prevent change becomes more desperate. By the time Bill tricks her into giving him the rift, it's barely contained, ready to explode and allow Weirdmageddon to begin. Mabel's decision to give the rift to what she thinks is Blendin Blandin is the crucial moment where her power spirals completely out of control. She's so desperate to avoid facing the end of summer, so emotionally devastated by Dipper's apparent choice to stay with Ford instead of going home with her, that she makes a choice that literally breaks reality. The rift shatters, the barrier between dimensions collapses, and Bill Cipher gains access to the physical world, all because Mabel's emotional state caused her reality-altering power to tear existence apart. Weirdmageddon as Mabel's nightmare. Weirdmageddon, the apocalyptic event where Bill Cipher transforms Gravity Falls into a nightmarish hellscape, is Mabel's power turned completely against itself. Bill is using Mabel's reality-altering abilities to reshape the world, but he's creating her worst fears instead of her fondest dreams. Every horror that manifests during Weirdmageddon is drawn from anxieties Mabel has expressed or demonstrated throughout the summer. The people turned to stone represent Mabel's fear of people leaving her, of relationships ending, of everything becoming cold and permanent. The henchmaniacs represent her fear of bullies and mean people, of others not understanding or accepting her cheerful nature. The chaos and destruction represent her fear of growing up, of the world becoming more complicated and dangerous. Bill is weaponizing Mabel's imagination against her, forcing her to unconsciously create a reality based on nightmares instead of dreams. The fact that Bill needs to keep Mabel imprisoned in Mabeland during Weirdmageddon is crucial. If Mabel were free and aware, if she saw what was happening to Gravity Falls, her horror and rejection of the nightmare would give her unconscious power something to fight against. She would want Weirdmageddon to end, and that desire would begin unmaking what Bill has created. So Bill keeps her locked in a fantasy prison where she doesn't know what's happening, where she can't oppose his use of her power, where she remains the battery that fuels the apocalypse without realizing her role. When Dipper finally frees Mabel from Mabeland, when she chooses to leave her perfect fantasy and face the difficult reality, she's taking the first step toward controlling her power consciously. She's acknowledging that reality includes pain and change and loss, and that trying to create a perfect fantasy world isn't healthy or sustainable. This emotional growth directly leads to Bill's defeat. Once Mabel accepts reality as it is, her power stops feeding Bill's nightmare and begins supporting efforts to restore normalcy. The memory gun and selective reality editing. The memory gun that appears throughout the series takes on new significance in this theory. The gun doesn't just erase memories, it edits reality itself, removing events from history, changing what happened by changing what people remember happened. In a universe where reality is partially maintained by collective belief and perception, changing everyone's memories effectively changes reality itself. The memory gun might actually be one of Mabel's unconscious creations. Stanford Pines is shown to have invented it, but the theory suggests that Mabel's power influenced its creation. She needed a device that could undo mistakes, that could erase embarrassing moments, that could reset situations when they went wrong. Her unconscious desire for a way to fix social disasters created the conceptual space for Ford to invent a memory eraser, reality bending, to provide Mabel with the tool she needed, even though she never asked for it directly. Stan's use of the memory gun to defeat Bill's Cipher is the ultimate example of using Mabel's reality editing power against Bill. By erasing the memories that contain Bill's existence, Stan is using the same mechanism Mabel uses unconsciously. He's editing reality through editing perception and memory. This only works because they're in a universe where Mabel's power has made reality malleable, where consciousness and existence are linked, where changing what people think about something can change the something itself. After Stan's memories are erased, the family's efforts to restore them are essentially efforts to restore reality itself. They're not just helping Stan remember his life, they're rebuilding the version of reality where Stan has that life, where those memories correspond to events that actually happened. Mabel's emotional investment in helping Stan drives this restoration. Her love for her grunkle Stan, her desperate desire for him to remember her, unconsciously powers reality editing in the opposite direction, restoring what was erased rather than erasing what exists. Why Mabel's power emerged in Gravity Falls. If Mabel has always had reality-altering abilities, why do they specifically manifest in Gravity Falls? The theory suggests that Gravity Falls is a thin place, a location where the barrier between normal reality and other possibilities is naturally weak. Many locations around the world have similar properties, places where strange things happen more easily, where the supernatural feels closer to the surface, where reality seems slightly more flexible than usual. Mabel's power exists everywhere she goes, but in most places reality is too stable and rigid for her unconscious desires to have much effect. In Piedmont, California, where the twins normally live, Mabel's power might create small coincidences, lucky breaks, and minor weirdness, but nothing dramatically supernatural. Reality in normal locations is reinforced by billions of people all agreeing on how things work, and one 12-year-old girl's imagination isn't enough to overpower that collective consensus. But Gravity Falls is different. The town's natural strangeness, its position as a thin place, its history of anomalies, all mean that reality there is already loosened up, already willing to bend, already accepting of possibilities that would be rejected elsewhere. When Mabel arrives in Gravity Falls, her power finds an environment where it can actually manifest significant effects. The town's weakness and Mabel's power amplify each other, creating a feedback loop where Gravity Falls becomes weirder because Mabel is there, and Mabel's power becomes stronger because Gravity Falls allows it to work. This is why Stanford Pines established his research base in Gravity Falls specifically. He was drawn to the town's natural anomalies, not realizing that many of those anomalies were retroactively created by Mabel's power reaching backward through time. Ford studied the symptoms without understanding the cause, documenting Mabel's unconscious creations while believing he was documenting naturally occurring phenomena, the Zodiac wheel, and Mabel's central position. The Zodiac wheel that appears throughout the series, which supposedly can be used to defeat Bill Cipher, contains symbols representing different characters. Mabel's symbol is the shooting star, placed at a specific position in the wheel's arrangement. The theory suggests this isn't just a random assignment of symbols. The wheel represents the actual structure of reality in Gravity Falls, with Mabel at the center as the source of creative power. The other symbols represent people who are connected to Mabel in various ways, who serve functions in the reality she's unconsciously creating. Dipper the pine tree is her twin and anchor. Stan and Ford the glasses are her family and foundation. Seuss the question mark is her loyal friend who accepts everything without questioning. Each person in the Zodiac plays a role in the reality Mabel constructs. And only by getting all these people to work together in their proper relationships can the full power of Mabel's creation be harnessed and directed. The Zodiac's failure during Weirdmageddon happens because the relationships are broken. Stan and Ford are fighting, unable to put aside their conflict, even to save the world. This broken relationship represents a break in the reality structure, a flaw in the network of connections that allows Mabel's power to function properly. Without all the elements working together in harmony, the Zodiac can't direct Mabel's reality-altering ability toward defeating Bill. Bill's defeat ultimately comes not from the Zodiac, but from Stan's sacrifice and the memory gun, a different application of the same reality editing power. But the Zodiac remains significant as a representation of how Gravity Falls reality is actually structured, with Mabel as the unconscious creative force at its heart and all other characters as supporting elements in the world she's imagining into existence. What happens after Mabel leaves? The end of the series shows Mabel and Dipper leaving Gravity Falls to return home. This departure raises an important question in the context of this theory. What happens to Gravity Falls after Mabel leaves? If she's the source of the town's weirdness, does the supernatural activity stop when she's gone? The theory proposes that Gravity Falls will gradually return to being a normal town now that Mabel has left. The anomalies will become less frequent. The monsters will disappear or become dormant. The magical elements will fade as reality reasserts its normal rules without Mabel's power maintaining the strangeness. Within a few years, Gravity Falls will be just another small Oregon town, unremarkable and mundane, with only a few elderly residents remembering the weird summer of 2012 when everything went crazy. However, there's another possibility. Mabel spent an entire summer unconsciously creating Gravity Falls weirdness, pouring her imagination and creative power into the town. That much reality editing might have permanent effects. The anomalies she created might be independent now, able to sustain themselves even without her presence. Gravity Falls might remain forever changed by Mabel's visit, permanently marked as a strange place even after she's gone. Or perhaps Mabel will return. The theory suggests that Gravity Falls will call to her, pulling at her unconscious mind, creating circumstances that bring her back to Oregon. She might feel an inexplicable need to visit, a homesickness for a place that was never really her home. And when she returns, the weirdness will intensify again, the anomalies will wake up, and the cycle will begin anew. The theory transforms Mabel from a supporting character in Dipper's mystery-solving adventures into the secret protagonist of the entire series, the unwitting creator of every strange thing that happens, the girl whose imagination literally reshapes reality around her without her ever realizing the magnitude of what she can do. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Stanley Pines, the identity death theory. Stanley Pines, the man who stopped existing. Stanley Pines appears to be a con man turned tourist trap owner, running the Mystery Shack and scamming visitors while secretly working to reactivate his brother's portal and bring him back from another dimension. But according to a theory that examines Stan's past and the permanent consequences of his sacrifice, Stanley Pines has been legally and existentially dead for decades. The man we see isn't really Stanley Pines anymore. He's a ghost, occupying a stolen identity, a person erased from reality who managed to keep walking around anyway, and his use of the memory gun at the end of the series completes his erasure from existence in ways the show doesn't fully acknowledge. The faked death and stolen identity. The show reveals that Stan faked his death in the early 1980s, staging a car crash that led everyone to believe Stanley Pines had died. He did this to assume his twin brother's identity as Stanford Pines, using Ford's name, credentials, and reputation to purchase the property that would become the Mystery Shack and to gain access to the resources needed to reactivate the portal. But faking death has permanent consequences that go beyond just changing names. When Stanley Pines died legally, he ceased to exist as a person in any official sense. His social security number was canceled. His driver's license became invalid. His bank accounts were closed. His birth certificate became a historical record of someone deceased. Every aspect of legal identity that allows a person to function in modern society was destroyed. Stan couldn't reverse this process without revealing the deception and facing serious legal consequences. So for more than 30 years, Stanley Pines has been a non-person, someone with no legal existence, no official identity, no documentation proving he's real. He exists in the space between identities, neither Stanley nor Stanford, unable to be himself and unable to truly become his brother. This liminal existence has profound effects. Stan can't go to doctors without risking exposure. He can't file taxes honestly. He can't obtain legitimate employment. He can't vote, can't get a passport, can't do any of the thousands of things that require proving who you are. He's trapped in Gravity Falls, trapped in the Mystery Shack, trapped in a stolen identity because leaving or trying to reintegrate with normal society would immediately reveal that he's a dead man walking. The theory suggests this existential state, this death of identity, is the real curse Stan lives under. He sacrificed not just his relationship with his brother or his potential futures, but his very existence as Stanley Pines. He performed a kind of suicide, killing who he was to become no one, and he spent 3 decades as a ghost, wearing his brother's face, living as Stanford Pines. Pretending to be Stanford requires more than just using a different name. Stan has had to live as Stanford for 30 years to respond to that name, to pretend to have Ford's education and credentials, to maintain the illusion that he's a respected researcher rather than a failed con man. This sustained performance has eroded Stan's sense of self. When you answer to a different name for 30 years, that name starts to feel more real, than your birth name. When you present yourself as someone else every single day, you start to become that person, to lose track of where the performance ends and your real self begins. Stan has lived more of his life as Stanley pretending to be Stanford than he lived as simply Stanley. The identity he's pretending to have has more history than the identity he actually had. This explains Stan's memory issues even before the memory gun is used. Throughout the series, Stan sometimes seems confused about his own past, uncertain about details he should remember clearly. He's living with two conflicting sets of memories and experiences. His real childhood and early adulthood as Stanley, and the false history he's had to construct and maintain as Stanford. After 30 years, these memories have blended together, creating confusion about which experiences belong to which identity. Stan sometimes refers to himself as Stanford, even in private moments or in his own thoughts. This isn't just maintaining his cover. He's genuinely uncertain where Stan ends and Stanford begins. He's been performing for so long that he can't fully separate the performance from reality. This identity confusion is a form of death, the gradual erasure of Stanley Pines through sustained pretense, the replacement of a real person with a fictional construction. Why Stanford resents Stanley's theft. When Stanford returns from the portal and discovers what Stan has done, his anger goes beyond simple identity theft. Ford is furious that Stan has been living as him, using his name, occupying his house, wearing his face. From Ford's perspective, he's been replaced by an inferior copy, a con artist who stole 30 years of his life. But there's a deeper horror for Ford. By taking his identity, Stan has made Ford's actual accomplishments and history seem suspicious. If anyone investigates Ford's background now, they'll find inconsistencies, gaps, behaviors during Stan's 30-year impersonation that don't match who Ford really is. Stan has contaminated Ford's identity, mixed his own failures and crimes with Ford's legitimate achievements. Ford can never fully reclaim his identity because Stan has lived in it for too long. The Stanford Pines who owns the Mystery Shack, who has a reputation in Gravity Falls as an eccentric recluse, who has tax records and business licenses and history in the town, that Stanford is actually Stanley wearing Ford's skin. The real Stanford, the man who came out of the portal, has no legal existence in the current timeline. He's been missing for 30 years, declared dead in some jurisdictions, and his return raises impossible questions about where he's been and what happened to the man who was using his identity. The brothers are trapped in a bizarre reversal. Stanley is legally dead but physically alive, wearing Stanford's identity. Stanford is legally alive, or at least his identity exists in records, but has no legitimate claim to his own identity anymore, because Stanley has been using it. Both brothers exist in identity limbo, neither able to be fully themselves. The memory gun as ultimate identity death. Stan's decision to use the memory gun to erase his own mind and defeat Bill's Cipher is portrayed as a noble sacrifice. But the theory suggests it's actually the completion of the identity death Stan began when he faked his death 30 years earlier. By erasing his memories, Stan completes the process of destroying Stanley Pines as a person. Memory is identity. We are the sum of our experiences, our relationships, our accumulated knowledge, and history. When Stan erases his memories, he erases everything that made him Stanley Pines. The man who wakes up after the memory gun is used isn't Stanley. He's a blank slate, a person-shaped object with no history, no identity, no self. Stan has committed the ultimate suicide, destroying not just his legal existence or his name, but his entire consciousness and sense of self. The show treats the memory restoration as successful, showing Stan gradually remembering his life and relationships through the family's efforts. But the theory questions whether the restored Stan is really the same person. The memories that return are rebuilt from photographs, stories, and external sources. They're not Stan's actual organic memories formed through lived experience. They're second-hand reconstructions, approximations of what Stan used to remember. The restored Stan might believe he's the same person, might have memories that feel real to him, but those memories are essentially implanted. He's been programmed with a life history that belongs to someone who's actually dead. The real Stanley Pines, the man with organic, unbroken memories stretching from childhood to the moment he used the memory gun, no longer exists. What returns is a different person who thinks he's Stan, who has Stan's approximate memories and personality, but who lacks the continuity of consciousness that makes identity persistent and real. This interpretation makes Stan's sacrifice much darker. He didn't just risk his memories temporarily. He permanently destroyed himself, committing existential suicide to save his family. The Stan who emerges afterward is a new person, kind and loving, and similar to the original, but fundamentally not the same being. Stanley Pines died twice, once when he faked his death and stole his brother's identity, and once when he erased his mind to stop Bill's Cipher, the moral weight of living under false identity. Stan's decision to assume Ford's identity wasn't just illegal, it was morally complex in ways the show doesn't fully explore. By becoming Stanford, Stan forced his brother to cease existing in any official capacity. Ford couldn't return to his life, couldn't use his credentials, couldn't claim his research or his accomplishments, because Stanley was already occupying that identity. Stan effectively killed his brother socially and legally, even though his intention was to save Ford physically by bringing him back through the portal. He made a unilateral decision that Ford's identity was less important than Ford's life, that it was acceptable to steal everything Ford was in order to potentially rescue Ford's body from another dimension. But this decision trapped Ford in the portal for 30 years, and when he finally returned, he found himself erased from the world, replaced by his brother wearing his name like a costume. The moral calculus gets even more complicated when we consider that Stan's 30 years of effort did ultimately succeed. Ford is alive because Stan sacrificed both their identities to save him. But was Stan entitled to make that choice? Did he have the right to destroy both himself and his brother in pursuit of redemption? The theory suggests that Stan's guilt over his role in Ford's portal accident was so overwhelming that he couldn't think rationally about the consequences of his actions. Stan chose identity death because he thought he deserved it. He believed he'd ruined Ford's life by accidentally activating the portal, so destroying his own identity seemed like appropriate punishment. He also believed Ford's life was worth more than his own, that Stanford, the genius scientist, was more valuable than Stanley, the failed con man, so sacrificing his own existence to save his smarter brother seemed obvious. But this self-loathing led Stan to commit acts that can't be fully justified. He didn't just hurt himself, he hurt Ford, forcing Ford into non-existence upon his return. He hurt their family, who spent 30 years thinking both brothers were dead or missing. He hurt Dipper and Mabel, who bonded with a man whose identity was a lie, whose real self had died decades ago. The two Stans problem. Throughout the series, both brothers are called Stan, leading to confusion and the need to distinguish them as Stan and Ford, or as Grunkle Stan and Great Uncle Ford, or a Stanley in Stanford. But this naming confusion reflects a deeper identity problem. There are two people trying to occupy spaces designed for one person. Stanley stole Stanford's identity, so there are two people who can claim to be Stanford Pines. The man who lived as Stanford for 30 years, running the Mystery Shack, and the man who was actually born as Stanford and created the portal. Neither has full, legitimate claim to the identity. Stanley used it illegally. Stanford abandoned it and can't reclaim it without exposing the deception and facing consequences. There are also two people called Stanley: the man who died in a car crash in the 1980s, and the man who erased his memories and was rebuilt from second-hand accounts. The original Stanley is dead, killed by his own deception and later by the memory gun. The new Stanley is a reconstruction similar but not identical to the original. The show resolves this by having both brothers retire together, leaving Gravity Falls on the Stan War II to sail around the world. But the theory suggests this resolution is only possible because both brothers have essentially become new people, neither fully the identity they were born with. They're ghosts of the Pines twins, approximations of Stanley and Stanford, close enough to satisfy everyone who knew them, but fundamentally different from the boys who grew up in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. Why Stan had to be the one to forget. The show provides a narrative reason for Stan being the one to have his memory erased. Bill is in Stan's mind, so erasing Stan's mind destroys Bill. But the theory suggests there's a deeper metaphysical reason why Stan specifically had to make this sacrifice. Stan was already in the process of erasing himself, already dying as a person through his sustained identity deception. Using the memory gun simply completed a process that began 30 years earlier. Stanford couldn't make the same sacrifice because Ford hasn't been engaged in identity destruction. Ford has problems, certainly, including arrogance and social isolation and difficulty with relationships. But Ford has maintained a continuous sense of self. He knows who he is, knows his history, maintains his identity across time, even when he's trapped in other dimensions. Ford's self is intact. In a way, Stan's isn't. Stan's willingness to erase himself, his immediate acceptance that he should be the one to forget everything, reflects his deep belief that Stanley Pines doesn't matter. He spent 30 years as a dead man. Finishing the job, becoming fully erased, rather than just legally deceased, seems like a natural extension of choices he's already made. Stan has no attachment to his own existence, no sense that losing himself would be a tragedy because he's already lost himself long ago. This makes the sacrifice less heroic and more tragic. Stan isn't nobly giving up a cherished self to save others. He's abandoning a self he already destroyed, accepting the final death of an identity he's been killing for decades. The family mourns the potential loss of Stan, but Stan himself isn't mourning. He's relieved to finally stop pretending, to stop maintaining the exhausting deception, to stop being the ghost of someone who died in a fake car crash in the 1980s. The summer is Stanley's last chance at being real. The summer Dipper and Mabel spend in Gravity Falls represents Stanley's final opportunity to be himself before he disappears completely. For 30 years, Stan has been Stanford, never able to drop the mask, never able to admit who he really is. But with Dipper and Mabel, he can be Grunkle Stan, a version of himself that's closer to the real Stanley than anything he's been able to express in decades. Grunkle Stan isn't exactly Stanley Pines, but he's not Stanford either. He's a third identity, a compromise between the dead man and the stolen face, a version of Stan that can exist openly because children don't know enough to question whether he's being consistent with who he claims to be. With his great niece and nephew, Stan can be grumpy, silly, crooked, and affectionate without maintaining the serious researcher persona required when pretending to be Ford. This is why Stan connects so deeply with the twins, why he's willing to sacrifice everything to protect them, why their presence in his life matters so much. They're giving him the gift of being real, of existing as a person rather than as a lie. Their love for Grunkle Stan validates that this third identity, this compromised self, has value. For the first time in 30 years, Stan is being seen and loved for something close to who he actually is. When Stan sacrifices his memory to save Dipper and Mabel, he's giving up the only period of genuine existence he's had in decades. The summer is the last time Stanley Pines is real, the last time he exists as more than a ghost or a lie. After the memory gun, even if the memories are restored, Stan will never be quite as real as he was during that summer when two kids loved their Grunkle Stan without knowing his name was a deception and his entire life was a fraud. What remains of Stanley Pines? After Stan's memories are restored, after the show ends, what remains of the original Stanley Pines? The theory suggests very little. The man who leaves Gravity Falls with Stanford to sail the world is a composite being, made up of reconstructed memories, restored personality traits, and entirely new experiences formed after the erasure. This composite Stan is loved by his family, is happy with his brother, and gets to live the retirement he deserves. But the original Stanley, the boy from Glassshard Beach who dreamed of sailing with his twin brother, who made terrible mistakes and tried desperately to fix them, who sacrificed everything including his own identity to save his brother, that person is gone. He died in a fake car crash and then died again when he erased his mind, and what returned is similar but not the same. Perhaps this is appropriate. Perhaps Stanley Pines needed to die completely to make room for something better, a version of Stan that isn't burdened by guilt and deception, that can openly love his family and be loved in return. Perhaps death of identity was necessary for rebirth, for Stan to become someone who could accept happiness without self-sabotage. Or perhaps it's a tragedy we're not supposed to notice. Perhaps the show wants us to believe Stan fully recovered, that the memory restoration was complete and perfect, that nothing important was lost. But if we examine the implications carefully, if we acknowledge what it really means to fake your death and live under a stolen identity for 30 years, and then erase your mind completely, we have to conclude that Stanley Pines is dead and has been dead for a long time. The man sailing the Stan of War II with Stanford is someone new, someone who deserves his happy ending, someone we can love and celebrate. But he's not Stanley. Stanley is gone. Stanley sacrificed himself twice over, died 2 deaths, and never came back. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Stanford Pines, the dimension-hopping consequences theory. Stanford Pines, the man who lost 30 years. Stanford Pines returns from the multiverse after 30 years trapped in other dimensions, hopping from world to world, surviving impossible dangers, and accumulating vast knowledge about the nature of reality. But according to a theory that examines the true cost of his dimensional travels, Ford didn't just spend 30 years away from home. He spent far longer than that in subjective time, possibly centuries or millennia, experiencing time dilation effects that mean his actual age and experience far exceed what his physical appearance suggests. The man who comes back through the portal isn't just 30 years older. He's ancient, traumatized beyond human comprehension, and fundamentally no longer the same species as the people he left behind. The time dilation problem. Time doesn't flow uniformly across dimensions. Physics tells us that time is relative, that it moves at different rates, depending on gravity, velocity, and other factors. In a multiverse with different physical laws, time dilation effects would be extreme. A dimension where time moves twice as fast would mean Ford spends 2 years for every 1 year that passes in his home dimension. A dimension where time moves 10 times as fast means 10 years for everyone at home. Ford visited dozens or hundreds of different dimensions during his 30-year absence. The show presents this as a linear journey. 30 years of hopping from place to place. But if Ford spent any significant time in dimensions with faster temporal flow, his subjective experience could be vastly longer. He might have spent years or decades in dimensions that equate to mere days back home. His 30-year absence from Earth could represent centuries of lived experience for him, personally. This explains Ford's incredible survival skills, his vast knowledge, and his combat abilities. He's not just a scientist who spent 30 years learning. He's someone with potentially centuries of experience, who has lived multiple lifetimes worth of adventures, dangers, and studies. His knowledge isn't impressive for someone gone 30 years. It's barely adequate for someone who might have lived for hundreds of years subjectively. The theory suggests Ford is deliberately vague about his dimensional travels because he can't accurately convey the time scale involved. When he says he's been gone for 30 years, he's referring to Earth years, the time that passed for Stanley and everyone else. But if asked how long it felt to him, how many years of personal experience he accumulated, the answer would be incomprehensible. He might not even know anymore. After enough dimensions with different temporal flows, after enough centuries of experience, keeping track becomes impossible. The psychological cost of living multiple lifetimes. Human psychology isn't designed to handle centuries of lived experience. Our brains are structured for roughly 80 to 100 years of life. Memory, identity, personality, all of these are scaled for a human lifespan. Someone who lives for centuries starts experiencing fundamental cognitive problems. Ford displays symptoms of extreme dissociation and emotional numbness. He struggles to connect with people emotionally. He doesn't trust easily. He has difficulty with social interaction and often seems disconnected from the concerns of those around him. These traits are explained in the show as resulting from 30 years alone and under threat. But they make more sense as symptoms of someone who has lived for centuries, who has seen so much that normal human experience barely registers anymore. Ford has watched civilizations rise and fall. He's seen friends die of old age while he continued on to the next dimension. He's experienced every possible emotion so many times that they have lost meaning. He survived countless near-death experiences, actual deaths and dimensions, with different rules about mortality and horrors beyond human comprehension. This level of experience destroys the normal human psychological architecture. Ford's obsession with the portal, his dedication to his research, his difficulty connecting with Stanley and the kids, all stem from being fundamentally more than human now. He's not just a person who had an unusually long life. He's become something else, a consciousness that has transcended normal human parameters through extreme experience, someone who can't fully relate to people who have only lived one short human lifetime. When Ford tries to explain his adventures to Dipper, he struggles to find ways to make them comprehensible, not because the adventures were complicated, but because compressing centuries of experience into stories that fit human attention spans and emotional ranges is impossible. Every story he tells is a vast oversimplification, leaving out years or decades of context that don't fit into linear narrative structure. The physical impossibility of Ford's survival. Ford's body shouldn't have survived 30 years of dimensional travel. He's been exposed to different atmospheres, different gravity levels, different fundamental physical laws. He's eaten food from dozens of dimensions, breathed alien air, been injured countless times in environments with no medical care. Any one of these factors should have killed him or permanently crippled him. The theory proposes that Ford's body has been fundamentally altered by his dimensional travels. He's no longer entirely human in the biological sense. His cells have adapted to the stress of constant dimension hopping, developing abilities that allow survival in conditions that would kill a normal person. He's been exposed to so many different environments that his body has become a kind of average of all possibilities, able to function in a wider range of conditions than any naturally evolved organism should tolerate. This transformation explains why Ford looks relatively normal, despite his ordeal. His body has learned to maintain human appearance while incorporating changes at the cellular or molecular level that make him something other than baseline human. He walks like a human, talks like a human, appears to age like a human, but his underlying biology has diverged from humanity through decades or centuries of adaptation to alien environments. Ford might not even need food, water, or air in the same way humans do anymore. These requirements might be psychological, habits maintained because they make him feel human rather than actual biological necessities. His body has transcended normal limitations through forced adaptation, making him something unprecedented, a human consciousness in a body that has evolved beyond humanity through experience rather than through generational evolution. Why Ford wants Dipper to stay. Ford's offer for Dipper to become his apprentice, to stay in Gravity Falls and study anomalies rather than return to California, seems like the request of a lonely man who finally found someone who understands his passion. But the theory suggests darker motivations. Ford recognizes himself in Dipper, sees his own curiosity and obsessive nature reflected in this 12-year-old boy. And Ford wants to save Dipper from making the same mistakes he made. Alternatively, Ford wants Dipper to make exactly the same mistakes, to walk the same path of dangerous knowledge and transformation. Ford is as lonely not just as a person, but as a species. He's become something more than human, and there's no one else like him, no one who shares his level of experience and understanding. If he takes Dipper as an apprentice, if he guides Dipper down the path of obsessive research and dangerous investigation, he might eventually create another being like himself. Dipper would spend years or decades studying with Ford. He would encounter things that change him fundamentally. Eventually, he might even travel through the portal, might spend subjective centuries dimension, hopping like Ford did. And when he returned, Dipper would no longer be human either. He would be like Ford, transcendent and isolated, unable to relate to normal people, existing on a level of experience and understanding that separates him from the rest of humanity. Ford wants this. He wants to create another of his kind, someone who can understand what he's become, someone who won't die after just a few decades of friendship. Ford has watched people die for centuries. He's tired of caring about beings who blink out of existence almost immediately by his standards. If he can transform Dipper into something like himself, he'll finally have a companion who lasts, someone who can share the burden of eternal experience. This is why Mabel's opposition to the apprenticeship plan is so important. She's not just protecting her relationship with her twin brother. She's unknowingly saving Dipper from transformation into something no longer human, from a fate where he would lose his normal life, his humanity, and eventually his ability to connect with anyone except Ford. Mabel keeps Dipper human by refusing to let him become Ford's apprentice. The Bill-Cipher partnership and its true cost. Ford's past partnership with Bill-Cipher is presented as a mistake made by a naive scientist who didn't understand he was dealing with a demon. But the theory suggests the relationship was more complex. Bill offered Ford something genuine, guidance in becoming more than human, in transcending the limitations of normal existence. The cost was Ford's sanity and humanity. But from a certain perspective, that's not a cost, it's a trade. Bill helped Ford build the portal, not primarily to give Bill access to Earth's dimension, but to give Ford access to the multiverse. Bill knew that dimension travel would transform Ford, would force adaptation and evolution that would elevate Ford beyond normal human parameters. This transformation was Bill's real goal. He wanted to create a being like himself, something that existed across dimensions, that had transcended normal limitations. Ford's 30-year exile was actually the completion of Bill's plan. Ford didn't escape from Bill by going through the portal. He fell into the trap Bill had been setting all along. Bill wanted Ford to dimension hop, to accumulate centuries of experience, to evolve into something no longer human. And it worked. Ford returned as something unprecedented, a hybrid between human and multidimensional entity, exactly what Bill tried to create. The betrayal Ford feels toward Bill isn't just about being used or manipulated. It's about realizing that Bill's promises were actually true. Bill really did help Ford transcend humanity, really did give him knowledge and experiences beyond anything a normal human could achieve. But the cost was everything Ford valued about himself, his humanity, his connections, his place in normal reality. Bill kept his word, and Ford hates him for it because the gift was indistinguishable from a curse. When Ford fights Bill during Weirdmageddon, he's fighting what he could become, what he's already partially become. Bill represents total transcendence, complete separation from humanity and normal reality, existence as pure consciousness, manipulating dimensions. Ford is partway down that path, transformed by his travels, but still clinging to his human identity. Bill is the end point of Ford's trajectory, and Ford rejects that future by fighting his former partner. The journals as cries for help across time. Ford's journals are presented as scientific documentation, careful records of anomalies and discoveries. But the theory reframes them as desperate messages across time, Ford's attempts to communicate with anyone who might find them while he's lost in the multiverse. The journals aren't just about cataloging Gravity Falls' weirdness. They're about creating a trail that might lead someone to rescue him, or at least to understand what happened to him. Ford didn't write 3 journals because he was thorough. He wrote 3 separate volumes because he wasn't sure which one would survive, which one would be found, which one would be readable after decades buried in the forest. He scattered them, hid them in different locations, hoping that at least one would endure and be discovered by someone who could understand their significance. The journals contain hidden messages, codes, and warnings that only make sense if you understand that Ford expected to be gone for much longer than his actual 30-year absence. He writes like someone who might be lost for centuries, like someone who might never return, like someone trying to document his existence before he disappears completely. The desperate tone in some entries isn't about immediate dangers in Gravity Falls. It's about Ford's growing realization that he might dimension hop forever, that 30 years might become 300, that he might lose himself entirely in the multiverse. When Dipper finds Journal 3, he's found exactly what Ford hoped someone would find: a guide to understanding Gravity Falls, tools for survival, and clues about the portal. But more than that, he's found proof that Stanford Pines existed, that the brilliant scientist who built the portal was real and not just a local legend. The journals are Ford's legacy, his insurance against being completely forgotten, his way of leaving a mark on reality, even if he never returns. The tragedy is that Ford did return, but the journals might have been more important if he hadn't. If Ford had been lost forever in the multiverse, the journals would be all that remained of him, all that proved he existed and achieved something. They would be messages in bottles from a man lost between dimensions, the only evidence that Stanford Pines once walked the earth and dared to explore beyond it. Why Ford can never truly come home. Ford physically returns to Gravity Falls, reunites with his family, and eventually gets the happy ending of sailing the world with his brother. But the theory argues that Ford can never truly come home because home no longer exists for him. The world he returned to is too small, too simple, too limited to contain someone who has experienced what he's experienced. Everything in normal reality seems trivial to Ford after centuries in the multiverse. The concerns of ordinary people, their jobs and relationships and daily problems, all of it is incomprehensibly petty compared to the grand cosmic scales Ford has witnessed. He tries to reconnect with normal life, tries to care about mundane things, but he can't. He's seen too much. He knows too much. He's been too far and can't shrink himself back down to fit into normal human existence. Even his relationship with Stanley is compromised. Stan experienced 30 years of Earth time, aging normally, living one life. Ford experienced potentially centuries of subjective time, aging who knows how much psychologically, living dozens or hundreds of lives across dimensions. They're twins by birth, but they're no longer the same age in any meaningful sense. Ford is vastly older in experience, if not in body, and this creates an unbridgeable gap between them. When Ford and Stan sail away on the Stan-O-War II, they're not going on a simple retirement adventure. They're leaving behind a world that neither of them truly belongs to anymore. Stan is legally dead and has had his identity erased. Ford is psychologically centuries old and can't relate to normal humans. They're both ghosts, both people who no longer fit into ordinary reality, and their departure is more like exile than retirement. The theory suggests that Ford will eventually leave Earth entirely, returning to the multiverse because that's where he actually belongs now. Normal reality is too constraining for what he's become. The Stan-O-War II voyage is a transition period, a way for Ford to maintain his connection to his brother and his humanity for a few more years before he inevitably returns to dimension hopping. And next time, he might not come back at all. The warning Ford represents. Stanford Pines is a cautionary tale about the cost of knowledge and the danger of transcending human limitations. he achieved his dreams, learned secrets about reality that no other human knows, and became something far greater than he started as. And in doing so, he lost everything that made his achievements meaningful. He can't share his knowledge because no one would understand. He can't connect with people because he's too far beyond them. He can't enjoy his success because success at this level is indistinguishable from isolation. Ford's story warns that there are types of knowledge and experiences that humans aren't meant to have, not because they're forbidden by some external force, but because our psychology and biology can't handle them. We're built for one lifetime of normal duration, for relationships with other humans, for existence in a single reality with consistent physical laws. Step too far outside these parameters, and we stop being human in any meaningful sense. Dipper, who idolizes Ford, needs to understand this warning. Following Ford's path leads to transformation beyond humanity, to power and knowledge at the cost of connection and meaning. The wise choice is to remain human, to accept limitations, to find fulfillment in normal life rather than pursuing transcendence. Ford learned this lesson too late after he'd already changed too much to return to who he was. The tragedy of Stanford Pines is that he won. He achieved everything he set out to achieve, learned everything he wanted to learn, and became something remarkable. And none of it made him happy, because happiness requires being human, requires limitations and ignorance and mortality. Ford traded happiness for understanding, humanity for transcendence, and by the time he realized the trade was bad, it was too late to reverse it. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Bill Cipher, the liberation theory. Bill Cipher, the prisoner trying to escape. Bill Cipher is presented as a demon from the nightmare realm, a malevolent entity seeking to break into Earth's dimension to cause chaos and destruction. But according to a theory that re-examines Bill's motivations and origins, Bill isn't evil in the traditional sense. He's desperate, a prisoner trying to escape a dying dimension, and every action he takes throughout the series is motivated by survival rather than malice. Bill's invasion of Gravity Falls isn't about conquest or chaos. It's about finding a new home before his current reality completely collapses, taking him with it. The nightmare realm is dying. Bill's home dimension, the nightmare realm, is described as chaotic and dangerous, a place where normal physical laws don't apply. But the theory suggests that the nightmare realm's chaos isn't its natural state. It's dying, collapsing under the weight of entropy and decay. The dimension is coming apart, losing coherence, fading into non-existence. Bill and any other entities that live there are facing existential extinction as their reality dissolves around them. This explains Bill's desperation and his willingness to make deals, manipulate, and destroy to achieve his goals. He's not being evil for fun. He's trying to survive. The nightmare realm is uninhabitable, or soon will be, and Bill needs to escape to a different dimension before he's destroyed along with his dying home. Every scheme he plots, every deal he makes, every attempt to break into other realities, all of it is driven by the knowledge that if he stays where he is, he'll cease to exist. Bill's fixation on Gravity Falls makes sense in this context. The town is a weak point in dimensional barriers, a place where the walls between realities are thin. For an entity trying to escape a dying dimension, Gravity Falls represents the best opportunity to break through. The natural anomalies there are tears in the fabric of reality, and Bill can potentially exploit these tears to force his way into Earth's dimension. The portal Stanford built was Bill's first real chance at escape. By manipulating Ford into creating a doorway between dimensions, Bill nearly succeeded in leaving the nightmare realm permanently, but the portal closed before Bill could escape, trapping him in his dying dimension for another 30 years. This failure explains Bill's intense anger and his escalating desperation when he finally gets another chance during Weirdmageddon. Why Bill needs a physical form. Bill exists as a two-dimensional entity, a flat triangle with limited ability to interact with three-dimensional reality. This isn't his choice or his natural form. It's a limitation imposed by his nature as a being from the nightmare realm trying to interact with Earth's dimension. He needs a physical form in 3 dimensions to exist permanently in Earth's reality, to escape his dying dimension completely. Bill's attempts to possess various characters throughout the series are desperate efforts to gain physicality. He can manifest temporarily through deals and possessions, but these are impermanent solutions. As soon as the deal expires or the host breaks free, Bill is pulled back to the nightmare realm. He needs a permanent physical form to anchor himself in Earth's dimension to prevent being drawn back to his dying home. This is why Bill is so interested in possessing Ford during Weirdmageddon. Ford has traveled the multiverse, has survived in dozens of dimensions, has a body that has adapted to different realities. If Bill could permanently possess Ford, he would have a physical form capable of existing stably in Earth's dimension. He could finally escape the nightmare realm completely, could establish himself as a being native to Earth's reality rather than as an invader constantly at risk of being expelled. Bill's deal with Dipper, offering knowledge and power in exchange for possessing his body, is another desperate attempt. Bill is offering genuine value, real knowledge that Dipper actually wants because Bill needs physical form that badly. He's willing to pay almost any price for a stable body in Earth's dimension, because without it, he's condemned to return to the nightmare realm and face extinction when his dimension finally collapses. Weirdmageddon as an act of desperation. Weirdmageddon, Bill's apocalyptic transformation of Gravity Falls, looks like chaotic destruction for its own sake. Bill turns people to stone, warps reality, and creates a nightmare hellscape with no apparent purpose beyond causing suffering. But the theory reframes Weirdmageddon as Bill's desperate attempt to remake Earth's dimension into something compatible with his existence. Bill can't survive in Earth's dimension as it naturally exists. The physical laws are wrong. The dimensional frequencies don't match his nature. The reality structure rejects his presence. Weirdmageddon is Bill forcibly reshaping reality to accommodate him, changing Earth's dimension into something more like the nightmare realm so he can exist there permanently without being rejected or destroyed. The chaos and horror of Weirdmageddon isn't the goal. It's a side effect of Bill trying to make Earth's dimension habitable for himself. He's not trying to create suffering. He's trying to create compatibility, to change the fundamental nature of reality so it can support his existence. The fact that this process is horrific for humans is unfortunate from Bill's perspective, but not his primary concern. He's fighting for survival, and human comfort is irrelevant compared to his own extinction. The henchmaniacs, Bill's followers and companions, are similarly desperate entities from dying dimensions trying to find new homes. They support Bill not because they enjoy chaos, but because Bill offers them the same thing he's seeking for himself: escape from dying realities, the chance to exist permanently, somewhere stable They're refugees, not invaders, fleeing from dimensional collapse and trying to establish themselves in a new reality that won't kill them. When the Pines family defeats Bill and traps him in Stan's mind before erasing Stan's memories, they're not just defeating a villain, they're condemning Bill to return to his dying dimension, to face the extinction he's been desperately trying to avoid. From Bill's perspective, this isn't justice, it's a death sentence, the destruction of his last hope for survival. His final words, his attempts to bargain, even as he's being erased, are the words of someone facing oblivion and begging for any alternative. The deals Bill makes and why they matter. Bill's power comes through deals, through convincing beings to voluntarily allow him into their reality or into their bodies. This isn't just a quirk of how demonic entities operate. It's a fundamental limitation imposed by dimensional laws. Bill can't force his way into Earth's dimension permanently. He needs to be invited, needs someone to voluntarily create an opening for him. Every deal Bill makes is a potential escape route, a possible way to establish permanent presence in a stable dimension. He's not making deals to trick people or gain power over them. He's making deals to create anchors, to establish connections that allow him to exist outside the nightmare realm. The more deals he makes, the more connections he has, the stronger his presence in Earth's dimension becomes, and the better his chances of surviving when his home dimension finally collapses. Bill's willingness to offer genuinely valuable things in his deals reflects his desperation. He gives Stanford real knowledge and real help building the portal because he needs that portal to work. He offers Dipper actual useful information because he needs to possess Dipper's body. He's not trying to cheat people in his deals. He's trying to create genuine exchanges that establish real connections he can exploit for survival. The tragedy is that Bill's deals are predatory despite his desperate circumstances. He offers people things they want while hiding the full cost of accepting his terms. He manipulates and deceives, not because he enjoys it, but because straightforward honesty wouldn't work. If he told people, "I need to use you to escape my dying dimension and you'll probably be destroyed in the process," no one would accept his deals. So he lies, he manipulates, he presents his offers in the most appealing way possible, while concealing the catastrophic consequences. This makes Bill simultaneously sympathetic and monstrous. He's fighting for survival, acting out of desperation rather than malice. But his survival requires harming others, potentially destroying Earth's entire dimension to save himself. He's willing to sacrifice unlimited numbers of beings in other dimensions to prevent his own extinction. This isn't evil for its own sake, but it's evil nonetheless. The ultimate expression of selfishness where your own survival justifies any cost to others. What Bill's defeat really means. When Bill is defeated at the end of the series, erased from Stan's mind and banished back to the nightmare realm, it's presented as a happy ending. The demon is defeated, reality is restored, everyone is safe. But from Bill's perspective, this is the worst possible outcome. He's been sent back to a dying dimension, his chance at survival is destroyed, and he's condemned to face extinction. The theory asks whether this outcome is actually just. Bill's methods were terrible, involving manipulation, possession, and attempted destruction of Earth's dimension. But his underlying motivation was survival, the most fundamental drive any being can have. Does someone deserve extinction for trying desperately to avoid it, even if their methods hurt others? Is condemning Bill to return to his dying dimension a just punishment or a genocide? Bill's final message before his defeat His plea to axolotl and his cryptic final words suggest he has one more escape plan, one final trick that might allow him to survive even after being erased from Stan's mind. The theory proposes that Bill's consciousness wasn't actually destroyed. It was dispersed, scattered across dimensions, hidden in the memories of everyone who ever made a deal with him or encountered him. Bill isn't dead. He's dormant, waiting for an opportunity to reassemble himself and try again to find a stable dimension where he can exist. This means Bill's defeat wasn't a true ending. It was a setback, a postponement of his plans rather than a permanent solution. Someday, somewhere, Bill will return because his need for survival hasn't changed. The nightmare realm is still dying, and Bill is still desperate to escape it. As long as he exists in any form, he'll keep trying to find a way into stable dimensions, keep making deals, keep manipulating beings who have what he lacks, a dimension that isn't collapsing into nothing. The prophecy and Bill's foreknowledge. Bill's ability to see the future, to know events before they happen, takes on new significance when viewed through the lens of a being trying to escape a dying dimension. Bill doesn't just see possible futures. He sees the inevitable collapse of his dimension, the timeline of his own extinction. He knows exactly when the nightmare realm will cease to exist, how long he has to find escape, what opportunities will arise that he can exploit. This foreknowledge drives his increasingly desperate actions. Bill isn't patient because he has all the time in the world. He's impatient because his time is running out. Every scheme that fails, every opportunity he misses, brings him closer to the point where escape becomes impossible and extinction becomes certain. His frantic energy during Weirdmageddon, his willingness to take enormous risks, reflects someone who knows the countdown clock is approaching zero. Bill's cryptic warnings and prophecies aren't meant to confuse or frighten. They're attempts to communicate across the dimensional barrier, to share knowledge that might convince someone to help him willingly, rather than needing to be manipulated. But his nature as a two-dimensional entity trying to communicate with three-dimensional beings creates fundamental comprehension problems. His warnings come out garbled. His attempts at honest communication seem like threats or riddles. When Bill tells Ford, "I'll give you anything," he means it literally. He would give Ford anything within his power if Ford would help him escape the nightmare realm. Knowledge, power, transformation, anything Ford desires could be his in exchange for helping Bill survive. But Ford, understanding Bill as a malevolent demon rather than a desperate refugee, interprets every offer as a trick. The tragedy is that Bill's genuine offers of exchange are read as manipulative lies, making cooperation impossible and ensuring their relationship becomes adversarial. The cycle will repeat. The theory concludes that Bill's story isn't over and can never be truly over as long as dimensions are dying and beings within them need to escape. Bill represents a category of entity, refugees from collapsing realities, seeking any way to survive. Even if this specific Bill Cipher is permanently defeated, others like him will appear, will try the same methods, will make the same desperate bids for survival, regardless of the cost, to the dimensions they try to invade. Gravity Fall's position as a weak point in dimensional barriers means it will continue to attract entities like Bill. The town will face recurring attempts at dimensional invasion, each time from different desperate beings fleeing different dying realities. The Pines family stopped Bill's Cipher, but they can't stop the fundamental problem. Realities sometimes die, and beings within them will do anything to escape extinction. This transforms Bill from a unique villain into a symptom of a larger existential problem in the multiverse. Dimensions aren't permanent. They can collapse, fade, or be destroyed. The beings within dying dimensions face a choice: accept extinction or try to force their way into stable dimensions and take them over. Most choose survival, just as Bill did, and this means dimensional invasions are inevitable and recurring across the multiverse. The theory reframes Bill Cipher as a tragic villain, someone whose actions are monstrous but whose motivations are comprehensible. He's not evil incarnate. He's a being facing extinction who chose survival at any cost, including the potential destruction of an entire dimension full of innocent beings. He's both victim and perpetrator, someone deserving of sympathy for his circumstances and condemnation for his choices. And he's a warning that in a multiverse of impermanent dimensions, the question isn't whether beings like Bill will appear. It's only when and whether anyone will be ready to stop them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Seuss Ramirez, the heart of gravity falls theory. Seuss Ramirez, the axis reality turns on. Seuss Ramirez appears to be the comic relief character, the lovable handyman who works at the Mystery Shack, provides tech support, and delivers laughs with his earnest personality and childlike enthusiasm. But according to a theory that examines Seuss's unusual place in Gravity Falls' narrative structure, Seuss isn't just a supporting character. He's the emotional and metaphysical center of the town, the person whose kindness and acceptance hold reality together, and the only character who fully understands what Gravity Falls truly is. Without Seuss, the town would tear itself apart through the weight of its own strangeness. He's the heart that keeps Gravity Falls alive.